Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Metz, and I'm a Senior Accessibility Specialist with the Disability Equity Office, joined by Katrina Johnson, who's providing ASL interpretation today. Thank you for joining us for this important workshop on workplace accommodations. Our goal today is to equip supervisors and HR partners with the knowledge and tools necessary to support an inclusive work environment that meets the needs of individuals with disabilities. The University of Michigan is committed to fostering an inclusive environment where accessibility and the needs of individuals with disabilities are prioritized, ensuring equitable opportunities for all members of our community. In today's session, we'll cover several key topics centered around promoting accessibility and inclusivity in the workplace. We'll start with an overview of the ADA, dive into the interactive process for accommodations, discuss frequently asked questions, and conclude with some key takeaways. So let's get started with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. The Americans with Disabilities Act, originally from 1990 and amended in 2008, is a federal law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in various areas, including in employment, places of public education, and in public places. It establishes an affirmative duty on employers to provide reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals. There are many other laws and regulations that apply at the University of Michigan, but we'll be focusing primarily on the ADA. At the University of Michigan, our non-discrimination and electronic information and technology accessibility policies further support our commitment by mandating non-discrimination and equal access to media for all. The responsibility lies with all of us to uphold these policies, regardless of our position at UM. So now let's discuss the interactive process. This is a collaborative approach where supervisors, HR representative, and employees work together to identify reasonable accommodations. To start, let's understand what we mean by disability. Under the ADA, a disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. These activities include things like bending, breathing, and working, among others. And what may be substantially limiting for one person may not be the same for someone else. It's important to note that an employee doesn't need to currently have a disability. If they have a record of an impairment or are regarded as having one, they are still covered under this definition. The Disability Equity Office facilitates requests for accommodation between the employee and their unit, but it's important to remember that this process is separate from handling complaints of discrimination or harassment, which are addressed by other channels. Employees often work with our office because they may be seeking help in determining what accommodations could be helpful and most beneficial for them. The goals of the interactive process are to ensure an employee with a disability can effectively perform the essential functions of their job, to provide an accommodation that supports the employee and benefits the employer, and to find a way for the disabled employee to work effectively, productively, and safely. The responsibility for accommodating is a shared one. Employees are expected to explain the limitations they face due to their disability, and it suggests preferred accommodations while still being open to alternatives, keeping in mind the employee does not need to reveal their diagnosis to their supervisor. Employers, on the other hand, need to consult with employees about their limitations and needs, consider their accommodation preferences, and explain how an accommodation may impact unit operations. Everyone is responsible for making decisions based on facts rather than what could happen, all while engaging in a good faith effort. An accommodation, which is a modification or adjustment to policy, practice, or the environment that provides a disabled employee with equitable access. Accommodation requests should put the employer on notice of the need for assistance with their essential job functions, but they do not need to be submitted in a special way or use specific language. Examples of an employee requesting an accommodation could sound like, I'm having a hard time getting to work because of a medication I take that makes me nauseous in the morning. Or, I need help with reading documents with small font. Our office likes to describe the interactive process as 4 steps to accommodation. For step number 1, An accommodation process begins when an employee submits the request, ideally with medical documentation. This enables our office to make a disability determination and pursue workplace accommodations. Medical documentation is needed unless the disability and need for accommodation is obvious, but supplied documentation should identify a diagnosis, limitations, and the recommended length of the accommodation need. An employee's disability or medical condition, symptoms, or personal information is kept confidential, meaning it's not shared without an explicit need to know. The second step of the interactive process involves a detailed conversation between the employee and an accessibility specialist, discussing essential job functions, potential barriers, and the limitations of the employee's condition. We use this as an opportunity to explore and consider accommodation options. I've mentioned essential job functions a few times now, but let's take a moment and really consider what an essential job function is. It's a duty that an employee must perform as part of their job. Examples of essential job functions are a truck driver who must have the ability to operate and drive a truck. Another, an office assistant, must be able to enter information into a database. Examples of non-essential job functions for these employees would be that truck driver scheduling a meeting. Perhaps this is something they do on occasion, but it's not a primary or essential function of the position itself. Another example of a non-essential function is that same office assistant watering the plants in the office. Step 3A of the interactive process. Accessibility specialists may meet with an HR representative before including a supervisor to discuss relevant policy information, upcoming changes in the unit, specific department needs, or performance concerns related to the accommodation request. Step 3B involves a discussion that includes the supervisor, HR representative, and the accessibility specialist. This discussion focuses on identifying how we can effectively accommodate workplace limitations and barriers experienced by the employee. We'll speak in depth about the employee's job and how an accommodation may impact unit operations. Whenever possible, we recommend that a unit should support an employee's requested or preferred accommodation if it is deemed reasonable. And how do we determine if an accommodation is reasonable? There's a lot of factors to consider, but we must remember that all accommodations are assessed on an individualized or case-by-case basis, where we do not consider medical necessity as a threshold for determining reasonableness, but instead we consider what accommodations will provide the employee with the support they're looking for. The only exceptions to a reasonable accommodation are as follows: a direct threat to health or safety, modifications to essential job functions, or an undue hardship on the unit. This can generally be described as a negative impact on unit operations based on the resources available. The final step in the interactive process is when all gathered information is reviewed to determine the most effective accommodation, where then everyone receives documentation outlining the accommodation agreed upon. There may be instances where a reasonable and effective accommodation cannot be identified. For example, if the only effective accommodation for the employee requires the removal of essential job functions. In these cases, there still are other options that could be available, such as reassignment to a different position, short or long-term disability leave, or other benefit programs. Some of the most common accommodations we implement are modifying or providing equipment to stand desks and ergonomic chairs and other workplace essentials. Another is modifying a work schedule with a flexible start or end time, different break schedules, or use of a hybrid work schedule. Another is providing accessible software like speech-to-text programs or time management software. And also alterations of uniforms or what someone's wearing to work, whether that's headwear, a fabric modification, or allowing someone in a different position to have facial hair. Implementing accommodations promptly helps to eliminate risk. We have a duty not just to identify the reasonable accommodation, but to implement it as soon as practical. This may mean purchasing equipment, installing software, modifying schedules, and even relocating furniture. If delays are unavoidable, document what steps you're taking to help move things along. We also recommend creating a communication plan that includes clear and concise expectations for both the employee and the unit. And also check in regularly. Make sure the accommodation is effective and working as expected. So now the four-step interactive process is complete. But now the unit and the employee need to begin to set up their own next steps. This is basically described as monitoring the accommodation. So we want to check on its effectiveness. Is it working as expected? We need to maintain the accommodation, making sure that it's staying in place unless the employee states it's no longer needed. We need to restrict medical inquiries, so there's no need for updated documentation unless there's a specific reason we might be asking for it. And also documenting our findings. So what is it about the accommodation that it either is or is not effective, and is there a change needed? There are three main keys to effective accommodations: being open-minded about alternative and different ways to support the employee, communicating effectively and frequently, and documenting each of the steps you've taken, whether that's what you said or what you did. I often get asked what are the costs associated with accommodations, and I'm happy to announce that more than half of accommodations have no cost whatsoever. But when there is a cost, the majority of people state that the fee to the unit is less than $300. For accommodations that require an ongoing cost, it's less than $2,000 a year. Some of those ongoing costs could be a software subscription, use of an interpreter or transcription, or a travel accommodation. And on average, the cost affiliated with accommodations is offset pretty quickly, usually within 6 to 10 months. And we can account for that on fewer missed workdays, fewer workers' compensation claims, and just overall more productive and effective employees. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the reasons we're required to accommodate, but now let's take a minute and talk about why you should want to accommodate. Accommodations enable employees with disabilities to have equal access to all opportunities. It results in greater employee retention, productivity, efficiency, and performance. There's improved safety and an increase in morale and improved coworker interactions. This is a great slide to keep handy for instances where the Disability Equity Office may not be as involved in the interactive process because an employee went directly to their unit. But we're always available to consult when questions come up. So we've created the supervisor checklist. Recognize a request for accommodation. Communicate options available for that accommodation. Contact the Disability Equity Office when there are questions. Make sure you're involving the employee in the process. Ask what you can do to support them and eliminate barriers. Ensure you're maintaining confidentiality and equity, and document all of the things that you said and did and what the responses were. But most importantly, come from a place of how can I help? Let the employee know that you're there to support them as best you can. When it comes to documenting, we also have some suggestions for you here. So these are the 6 things that we recommend that you document anytime an employee has questions or is requesting an accommodation. The first, document what the employee said when they requested an accommodation. So for example, the employee said they're having a hard time lifting heavy boxes. Number 2, document that you said, how can I help? An example, I asked what would be helpful to lift the heavy boxes. Number 3, document what the employee said. Maybe the employee requested a push cart. Number 4, document what you said in response to that request. Maybe you document that you said you were going to purchase a push cart, but we're going to consult with ergonomics to make sure we're getting something that's going to work well. Number 5, if you were provided medical documentation, you did not keep it but sent it to an appropriate party. Or document that you did not ask for any medical information or documentation. So an example here to document could be, I thanked the employee for having documentation available, but supplied it to the appropriate resource instead. And lastly, number 6, on X date, I followed up by. An example could be I spoke with the employee 3 weeks later to make sure the pushcart was working for them. So again, we're documenting. So now we'll move into our frequently asked questions section. One of the most common questions we get are, what are the most common concerns with workplace accommodations? What we typically see is a difficulty between supervisors and employees when it comes to communicating about accommodations or access. Another would be maintaining confidentiality. So oftentimes we're sharing information with people who do not have a need to know about the accommodation or the employee's medical needs. We often hear from our supervisors that not knowing what the condition is causes a lack of understanding as how the limitations relate to job duties. But what the Disability Equity Office does is determine that reasonableness of the accommodation request on behalf of the employer so that we're maintaining privacy for the employee. And another concern is putting too much stock in morale and precedent. So if we create an inclusive workspace to help address those concerns, but they're not a reason to deny an accommodation. And sometimes that what if mindset can really cause a lot of issues. So always go for the fact-based approach. Another question we get is, when should an employee request an accommodation? And we suggest before there are performance issues. Though there is no a specific time frame where an employee must request an accommodation, it's always wise to request an accommodation as soon as there is difficulty performing essential job functions because of the employee's disability. So as soon as they realize they need help, they should reach out to our office because accommodations are not retroactive. Can accommodations change? Yes, of course, all accommodations can be amended at any time. So either the employee or the unit can contact our office and request a review of the accommodation that's been put in place. So we'll re-engage in the interactive process to help determine a more effective accommodation that works for the employee and for the unit. What accommodation information can be shared? So I mentioned before the need to know basis. So sometimes this can include other supervisors that the employee reports directly to. If the employee's request or accommodation refers to a schedule adjustment, the person who creates a schedule may need to know about the accommodation. Or someone who is in charge of purchasing the employee's new sit-to-stand desk, they would need to know about the accommodation. So they don't need to know specifics about the disability, just that there is an approved reason for that purchase. Supervisors and managers can also share work-related restrictions, such as a 10-pound weight lift restriction. But sharing that an employee has an accommodation is also sharing the employee's private disability information because accommodations are based on medical need. And the very most frequently asked question we get is, how can we respond to coworkers asking about accommodations? So coworkers do not have a need to know about someone else's accommodation. Information should not be shared, but you can use any of the statements listed here. Respect the privacy of your coworkers, just as you would want your privacy respected. We're acting for legitimate business purpose. We're complying with legal obligations. We're here to assist any employee who encounters difficulty in the workplace. Let's discuss your needs privately. Can I expect individuals with disabilities to perform equally as those without disabilities? Yes. Any employee with a disability still has to meet the same production and performance standards as any non-disabled coworker who's in the same job. However, accommodations may be necessary to assist that employee in meeting those production or performance standards. So we should always make sure that as supervisors, we're giving clear and concise expectations regarding the quality of an employee's work. Must I rescind discipline after an employee discloses their disability? No. As mentioned before, accommodations are not retroactive. However, we do suggest that if it's the first time the employee has stated that their disability is the cause of whatever the need for discipline was, the supervisor should still provide information about accommodations. and clear and concise expectations for performance and productivity standards. Keep in mind, a supervisor cannot refuse to engage in the interactive process or to provide accommodations as a result of any discipline. If an employee requests FMLA, do we need to mention accommodations? And the answer here is a maybe. It depends. A request for FMLA for an employee's own medical condition could also prompt engagement in the interactive process. Ask the employee if they need support beyond what FMLA can provide. And if that employee states yes, provide them information about the interactive process or refer them to the Disability Equity Office. If they state no, you don't need to pursue accommodations. But again, document that interaction. And our last question, can I ask employees with known disabilities if they need an accommodation? Yes, of course. However, some supervisors may prefer to ask if there's any step that can be taken to enable that employee to improve their performance without mentioning accommodations. How can I help is a great way to start. Also, how can I support you? And how can we make the environment more inclusive? Simply be prepared to offer resources, how to request accommodations, or a referral to the Disability Equity Office. In wrapping up, we have a few key takeaways for you all. Keep an open mind. Be prepared to accommodate employees. Consult with the Disability Equity Office when questions come up, and communicate with the employee to make sure that you're supporting them in a way that they need. We have some don'ts for our takeaways as well. Don't live in the what if mindset. Don't ask about an employee's medical condition or ask for medical documentation. Don't share information about an employee's medical condition or their accommodation without a specific need to know. And lastly, don't be afraid to ask for help or assistance. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found this information helpful. Just be sure to contact our office if you have any questions in the future.